Good afternoon, everybody, and a big welcome to the Buddhist Society and to this new course introducing Sanskrit. It's lovely to see you all, and also very heartwarming to see such an interest in Sanskrit. You know, when I started in Buddhism, you know, the whole intellectual thing was very much sort of things you didn't do. You were into the feeling, the emotions, the work, the practice, and all the rest of it. And here we are with I think in our audience at the moment, certainly more than 75 people. And so we're going slightly in the other way too. And I think it's important to realize that Sanskrit, a sacred language, you know, to be studied, to be as an act of devotion to the Buddha, an act of devotion to the Dharma, an act of devotion to our practice, deepens our knowledge, refreshes our minds, and makes all sorts of fascinating links with our own language, which is, after all, a language based in the same group. I don't know if it's based on Sanskrit, but it's certainly in the same group of Indo-European languages, which Sanskrit plays a very large part. It was lovely to have with us our teacher, our venerable teacher, James Whelan, who I'm delighted to say I've known for many, many years. We first met in 1975 when James and I and Christmas Humphreys and Venerable Myokyoni started the Zen Trust. And James was responsible in his wearing his legal hat, drawing up the papers for the Zen Center. And he's obviously had a very busy life as a lawyer, as practicing lawyer, and has come back to something he really loves, which is languages, Sanskrit languages. She studied at Pembroke College and Cambridge. And so without further ado, without going too much into anything else, I would just like to say thank you, James.
Okay, thank
you so much for giving these classes. Really looking forward. And if you have questions, there's the chat bar. James will tell you about how the use of the chat bar and the questions now. And James, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Desmond. First of all, can I apologize in advance if anything is a little bit clunky? Here I am, not a particularly technologically minded person operating just on computer kit in my own home. Hopefully I'll be able to rely, I know I can rely on the team behind the scenes at the Buddhist Society to help me over the clunky bits if anything does go wrong. Sanskrit, yes, Desmond mentioned the origins of our own language in Sanskrit. It goes back to Proto-Indo-European. Sanskrit, or Vedic, even before Sanskrit, it's one of the second oldest recorded language of the Indo-European languages. The other one, there are just fragments left of old Hittite from the Middle East, but that's entirely died out. Vedic and now Sanskrit, of course, are still a living, vibrant tradition, more so among the Hindus, but to a certain extent among the Buddhists. And of course, the close daughter language of Sanskrit, or Vedic rather, which is Pali, is very much a living and vibrant tradition. And I'll be mentioning Pali to a certain extent while teaching Sanskrit, just as when teaching Pali, I mention Sanskrit a lot. They're effectively a linguistic continuum between Sanskrit and Pali. Before I go into that, I'll just say something about the connection of Sanskrit to our own language and to the Indo-European languages generally. From its very, very distant origins, probably in the steppes of Central Asia, we had the migration of tribes, migrating in various directions. The one we're particularly concerned with is those speakers of that primitive form of Indo-European who migrated into northern India and are settled in what's now the Punjab and the Indus Valley. And they spoke their own ordinary language, nothing especially sacred about it to start with. And then they devised, as the centuries went on, their religion developed. They had their sacred hymns, which then were recorded, not recorded in writing. They weren't recorded in writing until fairly recently in millennia terms, and they were known as the Vedas. The oldest ones is the Rig Veda. And it's from that language that about the same time as the Buddha, actually, the great grammarian Panini, whose work is still highly respected among modern linguists. I mean, he was an absolute intellectual giant, that he organized and refined the language, the rather scattered, grammatically rather loose language of the early Vedas, and he refined that into what we now know as Sanskrit. In fact, the word Sanskrit itself means Sanskrita, cognate with our word concrete, put together, assembled. It's the refined language. It's almost like the Queen's English then of the scattered languages of northern India. So when I talk about Vedic, I'm talking about the pre-Panini, slightly looser form of the language. When we're talking about Sanskrit, we should, strictly speaking, be talking about the language as formulated by the great grammarian Panini. So I'll often be saying Sanskrit by force of habit when actually I should be saying Vedic, but treat them as virtually the same for this purpose. Now, the same tribes or the same remote origin of people who migrated to northern India, the same migrated northwards into what is now Russia, and where we have the Slavonic languages, and huge areas of vocabulary and even grammar you will find common to Sanskrit and Russian. I'll be mentioning Russian simply because I happen to know Russian, but it will apply to the other Slavonic languages as well. And the loveliest one of all to see the connections is that the modern Russian root for to awake is Bud. Well, yeah, no coincidence. That is our Buddha. In fact, the modern Russian for an alarm clock is a budilnik, something that makes you Buddha, that wakes you up. And then through to Greek and Latin and the Germanic languages. And we use in our modern speech so many words and grammatical constructions that have their roots in that same language that those early tribes spoke when they migrated into northern India and started composing their sacred hymns. I mentioned Vedic. Vedic comes, we add the ik on to make an adjective out of an noun. The Vedas, from the root vid. Well, in Latin, the root is also vid, as in video, where we have video, which means I see. Seeing and knowing were conflated there. If you see something, you know it. And if you know it, it's because you've seen it. So that vid. The modern Russian root for to see is vid, and our word vision via the Latin, and equally in English, our word wit, not in the sense of wit being funny and clever, but losing your wits, keep your wits about you. A witness is somebody who has direct knowledge, somebody who has the vid, who has seen. And so many other things that turn up all over the place. We'll be looking at it bit by bit as we go along. You might occasionally have to stop me going down little rabbit holes of etymology because I find it such fun. But just to give you a couple of examples, as I say, they'll be turning up the whole time as we go on, to show you how these words that we'll be learning in Sanskrit and Pali, those of you who join me for Pali, it's not just random strings. So much of it, if you delve, is reflected in the language that we're using now. So, for example, you will hear me saying more than once that the sound sh in Sanskrit, that becomes a s in Pali, the sound sh in Sanskrit often is reflected as a s or a k in Greek, and very often as a k in Latin. So, for example, the Sanskrit word horse, ashwa, which in Pali becomes assa, but I'll try and stick to Sanskrit. Ashwa, again, might seem a random series of sounds that you have to remember that means horse. Well, now remember the rule, the sh often becomes a k in Latin. So the ashwa in Sanskrit is the equus in Latin. So equestrian, when we use the word equestrian, an equine, we are using a word that has its roots in that primitive Indo-European language that retains the form ashwa in Sanskrit and equus in Latin. And another one, the Sanskrit root nash, meaning to destroy or to be destroyed or to perish or to cause harm. Now we have in specialized medical terminology from Greek, nosology, which is the study of illness. Not many people know that word unless they're doctors or, like me, etymologists who happen to look it up. But now follow that same rule I just told you, not the rule, but something often seen of the sh becoming a k in Latin, so that nash in Sanskrit becomes a nok, N-O-C in Latin. And now through to English, when we use the word noxious, we are using that same word that was nash in Sanskrit and well before. So it's that same root that we have direct evidence going back at least 3,000 years and probably way before. And if you are in Latin innocens, and in English we say innocent, that means you have not caused any knock, you have not done anything wrong, you haven't caused harm. So these are just a few little examples. I'll be, but as I say, we'll be going more and more. One lovely one I discovered only 2 days ago. You've all heard of an avatar. It's from the root tre, meaning to cross, and ava meaning down. So an avatara in Sanskrit, an avatar is somebody who crosses down. In particular, crosses down from a divine realm into a human realm. That's the avatar. But it's from the root tre, and tara, meaning to cross. Now, the word nectar, I discovered to my delight only a day or two ago, that nectar, in fact, is from a very ancient root, is from the root nash that we have just seen, nash meaning harm, and tar meaning to cross. In Sanskrit, it will be nashatara. Something enables you to cross beyond, to cross harm. It's like a magic potion. It's your nasha tara, your tara, the crossing over the nasha, crossing beyond the risk of harm. And by the k and the tar, the shatka, lo and behold, it turns up in Latin as nectar. So nectar means nectar. That enables you to tar, to cross over the harm, like a magic potion that saves you from injury. So I'll have to stop myself going into more etymology now, otherwise we'll be spending the entire time on it. Let me tell you something about the class and what I'll be doing. This is a class that kind of drops you right in at the deep end. In September, we will be starting a formal language course, and you'll all get full materials for that and full details in advance. We might have been doing it now, but for the fact there wasn't simply time to get the whole thing ready. And the text I'll be using now is one that I prepared some time ago, so it is ready. So here you'll be dropping dropping in at the deep end, or I will be dropping you in at the deep end, because we'll be going straight into a genuine Sanskrit text written by a Sanskrit-speaking monk and scholar, Shantideva, for Sanskrit readers. So there's nothing simplified or artificial about it. The reason I've chosen this particular one, this chapter 7 from the Bodhicharyavatara, is because it's written in such direct, relatively simple Sanskrit. The concepts are clear, the language is clear, it's really forceful stuff. But it's not, as I say, artificial, it's not made up sentences for textbooks. This was Sanskrit written by an actual Sanskrit writer for Sanskrit readers. I will be giving you a certain amount of grammar as we go along, enough hopefully to understand it. At this stage, at this early stage, these 3 lessons, we'll be looking more at the vocabulary and the meaning of the words. In September, we'll be going on to the grammar and a formal language course. And if I can just mention the Pali course I've been teaching, it's worked very well where we do an authentic Pali text for an hour, then we have a break, and then we do the formal language, the grammar grind for an hour, so that people aren't getting bored out of their Vedas, bored out of their wits, with just solid grammar and made up sentences. We're doing some genuine original language followed by the hard grind of the grammar. And as we go through the hard grind of grammar, I will try to introduce genuine little mantras, phrases, snatches of verse, and so on, that where you can actually take away some authentic, genuine stuff, even in the simple grammar lessons. So hopefully there the grammar will be spiced up with some real or authentic text as we go along. Now, I've reached the point where I need somebody to remind me what I was meant to say next, but since none of you know, I don't think I can look at anybody. I'll just have to think of it myself. Yeah, okay. We are going to go straight into chapter 7, the perfection of what's known as Vigour. Now, I'm going to share my screen with you. Hopefully, I'm going to get this right. Excuse clunkiness. Share screen. Screen 3. Share. Okay, can you reassure me from mission control that you are seeing my shared screen? Jolly good. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. This is something that you should all have. It was the text, one of the texts made available through the links for this class. And the very title itself, the words right at the top, the perfection of Vigour, they actually are a really good object lesson in why we are doing this, why we are sitting here learning Sanskrit, when there are what you might call perfectly good translations available. Well, the answer to that is that however brilliant the translator, if you're doing a one-for-one, word-for-word translation, there is simply no such thing as a totally adequate translation. It does not exist. Even in such beautiful works of translation as, for example, the King James version of the the King James version of the Bible generally, but especially of the New Testament, anyone who knows Greek will say, yes, that is a lovely translation, but it doesn't catch it all. It catches some of it, but it simply cannot catch it all. So just look at the word Vigour, which is how it's often translated. This word virya is often translated. Now, some of you may have seen Ringu Tulku teaching the Bodhicharya Avatara, going through all 10 chapters. And he did an entire session on the meaning of virya, what it actually means. So vigor, the trouble is with these translations, we use the word vigor, and depending what our native language is, I take it most people here are native English speakers or know English very, very well. But even in your own language, in anybody's language, a word like vigor is going to have a certain range of meanings and a range of tones. It doesn't have one meaning. There are certain words where the meaning is fairly restricted, and you know what's being said. I mean, for instance, a mobile telephone is a mobile telephone, and there's not too much argument about that. And then a ballpoint pen is a ballpoint pen. Great. And if you read I said there's no such thing as a perfect or reliable translation, yet the instructions how to operate a toaster might have been written in a foreign language, but the instructions to operate the toaster will normally be very simple and reliable, and you might even say perfect. Okay, that's for toasters and how to operate equipment. When it comes to the kind of subject matter that we're dealing with in the Sanskrit and Pali scriptures, it just doesn't work like that, and no translation will ever cut it. So let us just look now at this word translated as vigor, which in fact in Sanskrit is virya. Now, if we just examine, sorry, got my wires tangled here. Oh, yeah. So I'm going to share a different one now. So virya. It's from the word vira, and this is one of the several ways of making an abstract noun from a concrete noun. Vira originally meant just a man, but man more in the kind of human being as opposed to man, woman. And changing the ataya, you can make an abstract noun. So it's manliness. I'm afraid for those who are sensitive to the issue, it's going to be virtually impossible while teaching Sanskrit and Pali to avoid what might appear as blatant sexism. And we just have to accept that when we're dealing with languages and concepts and cultures from 2,500 years ago, we've just got to take it as it was. So, and in fact, there's one way in which the better meaning of that word is entirely gender-free. Look at vira, okay, meaning a man. It's cognate with the Latin word vir. There we are. And we get a word like virile, virilis in Latin, but we also get words like virtue. So virtue has nothing to do with whether you're male or female. Virtue is the quality of the enhanced human being, the way a human being properly behaves. But looking back now to the Sanskrit way, so by the way, the mere fact that these words have come down to us doesn't mean they have the same meaning. They almost invariably have a related meaning, but there are often big and important differences, as here. So virya, in the of the vira, the man, the virya, the hero, a person of strength. But then it came to mean kind of energy. And by the time it came to be used by Shantideva, approximately 1,500 years ago, it has the meaning of making an effort, putting forth energy. So it's not just vigor, it's the idea of making an effort, the effort and energy of movement. Just directing your own life force. in a skillful in a kushala direction. So it embodies all these meanings of effort and energy, and it's the opposite of laziness and sloth. And we'll see in detail now what he was, because he describes exactly what he means by it. Right. I'm now, here we go, plunging into the Sanskrit properly. I'm going to read verse 1 of the chapter 7, Bodhicharyavatara. I'll read it slowly twice in Sanskrit. By the way, I've been asked often, how do we know how Sanskrit was pronounced? And how can me or anybody else be so sure that we're pronouncing it right? The answer is we have a much better idea for Sanskrit and Pali than virtually any other ancient language for several reasons. Firstly, the grammarian Panini didn't just deal with grammar. He actually, in a very scientific way, was describing in his Ashtadhyayi, which is the grammatical work he wrote, exactly where the vocal organs are placed to produce various sounds. So here we have the earliest ever, from 2,500 years ago, somebody who had this sufficient kinesthesia, namely awareness of the movements, awareness of what his tongue and his vocal organs were doing, to say this is how it is done, to enunciate it in the correct way. So that has actually come down to us now. And also a second reason, and there's a third one as well. The second reason how we can be pretty sure how it was pronounced is that the languages of northern India that descend directly from the Prakrits, that's the spoken languages and Sanskrit, like Hindi, Marathi, Gujarati, Bengali, Bahari, Nepali, they're all sufficiently similar in the way they're pronounced to make us reasonably certain how the proto-language was pronounced over 2,000 years ago. And for example, in the modern languages that have descended from Latin, there are big differences, of course, especially with French. But if you look at Romanian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian, there's sufficient, of course, there are differences there, but in a large number of areas, they pronounce the letters in exactly or almost exactly the same way. I say not all, but many. So from that, we can be pretty sure that if people now have had no contact with each other for well over 1,000 years, in some cases 2,000, if they're all pronouncing certain letters the same way now, we can be pretty sure that was how it was pronounced then. But the third reason, in a sense, the most interesting reason, I think, for those who are learning Sanskrit now, is that the very vibrant oral tradition in India, particularly among the Brahmins, of reciting the Vedas and reciting their Sanskrit texts. And if you hear, and you can go onto the internet, and the internet is awash with all amount of material, any amount you want, of the Vedas and other early Sanskrit texts being chanted and recited. And from Kashmir down to Tamil Nadu, the length and breadth of India, you will be hearing these Brahmins reciting the Vedas in virtually exactly the same way. There may be trivial differences in how certain things are pronounced. Some of them might say Sanskrit, others might say Sanskrit, but trivial differences which really don't matter for us at all. That is why we can know from this ancient tradition that we can still get now on the internet and listen to it for yourselves, the direct descendant of how these hymns were being chanted in Vedic times. And they were already old and venerable by the time of the Buddha. So we can actually hear it on the internet. And what I'm trying to do, to the best of my ability as a native English speaker, is to pronounce Sanskrit in the way that it's pronounced by the Indian Brahmins, I mean, I used to be pretty fluent in Hindi, so I give it a more or less Hindi pronunciation. So I'm pronouncing it as you would hear a Brahmin of anywhere in India, but particularly north central in India. If I fail, that's my fault. It's not because the known scholarship is defective. It's just because of my own deficiencies, which I hope won't be too grave in pronouncing it correctly. So here we go with verse 1, which you should all have in written form. Evam kshamo bhajed viryam virye bodhiryata sthita. Nahi viryam vina punyam yatha vayu vina gati. I'll do it once more slowly. Evam kshamo bhajed viryam virye bodhiryata sthita. Nahi viryam vina punyam yatha vayum vina gati. So this verse itself indicates what he's getting at when he's talking about virya. For example, there is not even the movement of the leaf without, you said, there is no punya without virya, just as there is no movement without wind. The imagery here is the movement of foliage. There has to be a flow of energy, a palpable energy to move the leaves. There has to be virya, this sense of striving towards it, getting a bit of energy before we can have punya. Now, punya, again, this is going to show us how the translations never fully get it, partially get it. Let's look at the word punya. By the way, you hopefully will have seen the videos that I did on the diacritics and what these various diacritics mean. Diacritics is just from the Greek word diakrinain, meaning to distinguish. So, for example, the diacritics, as a short ah, we distinguish with the macron, the Greek meaning large, along ah, and we distinguish a dental t from the cerebral or retroflex da by means of a diacritic. But it's all fully explained in those videos. So punya, that dot under the n, means it's a retroflex n. Punya. In Pali, for those who know Pali, it becomes punya, but it's the same word. Often translated as merit. So here he's saying, for one translation of the word the Charyavatara, without vigor, there is no merit. And I would say, well, hang on. So far, so good, but it means a great deal more than that. What does punya mean? It's often translated, particularly from the Theravada tradition, as merit, and making merit by offering alms to the monks. Well, okay, yes, so far so good, but there's a great deal more to it. From the Sanskrit root pu, with a short u. By the way, hopefully you, all of you will have seen the video on roots and stems and what we mean by those things. Just briefly, for those who don't, the root is the irreducible minimum unit of a language. When I use this tick sign here, that represents the square root sign. It's a device often used by linguists to indicate that is the root. So that root pu, surprise, surprise, in Latin, we have it as purus, and that's come into English as pure. So punya from the root pu means not just merit, it has more the idea of something that purifies you, that enhances your being, and particularly in the context of Buddhist practice, it's something that cleans away the muck, cleans away the defilements and filth. So punya is an act or attitude, but often an act that has that effect, that purifying effect. So he's saying in the second line, nahi viryam vina punyam. Vina, just a word meaning without. In modern Hindi, bina, for those who know Hindi. So na, okay, not, that's easy enough. English, no, not. Latin, non, and so on. Russian, nie, sorry, nie, in Russian. And the he is a slight emphatic. You often, where somebody is pronouncing some kind of moral teaching like this, starting with the negative, he could say naviryam vina, but nahi just emphasizes, for there is no viryam without, sorry, there is no punyam without virya. So there is no act of purification, there is no punya that you can do without virya. Nahi viryam vina punyam. I'm concentrating on the second line now. We'll go back to the first line in a moment. Nahi viryam vina punyam yata vayum vina gati. Yata means as, just as. So he's making a comparison. There is no punyam without viryam, just as yata, there is no gati, no movement without vayu, without wind, meaning movement of the leaves on the trees is the imagery here. Now look at this word vayu. It's from the root va. Hopefully none of you will get bored by me going back to roots and prefixes and how words are built up. I promise you, if you get used to the roots and how words are built up, it will make vocabulary learning so much simpler, and it'll also bring it to life, and it will help you tie it into our own language. So for example, if somebody sees the word nirvana, okay, right, we all know the word nirvana, but maybe quite a lot of people think that's just a 3-syllable word. We don't really know what it means. We kind of know what we're told what it means, but it's just a string of noises. Well, actually, no. If you take the root va, and it's that same va, nir is a prefix, meaning out, and va is a root meaning blow. So the nirvana, the ordinary physical meaning, is the same word as blowing out a candle, nirvana. And our word wind is from that same root, the vana, the wind, Latin ventus, from which we get ventilate in English, letting the wind through. So there we are, it is a blowing out. And this ending na, for example, you'll get to know that very well. It's such a common ending. We have the word dhya. The root's dhya, fixing the mind. Well, we all know the word dhyana. It's the same na. It's equivalent to our ing, like doing something, making a noun out of it. So the vayu, from va, we get another word, vayu, which effectively just means blowing. Sorry, vayu just means blowing. And we'll do quite a lot as we go along on how these prefixes and suffix get added to words, like added to roots to build up the meaning. So you now know va, to blow, cognate with our wind, and ventus, nirvana, blowing out, vayu, that which blows, the wind. Let's look at gati. Translated sometimes as movement. Well, it's from the root gum, meaning to go, which actually happens to be the same as our English word come. Gum, come. There we are. Come and go actually come from the same root. It doesn't seem that they do, but they do. So gum, it makes its past participle. Don't bother about memorizing all this. We'll be studying it in detail. But I'm giving you words now that hopefully you know, like nirvana, dhyana, and gata. It's slightly irregular. You would have expected to see gamta or ganta, but it becomes gata. As, for example, which means gone, from the root gum, to go. As in tata gata, thus gone, crudely translated as thus gone. And we make a verbal noun out of it. We can do it more than one way, but one common way of making a verbal noun is by taking the past participle gata and changing the ta to the a to e. So gati means a going and generally movement. Now, another lovely bit of etymology, so hopefully you will never forget this, is that our English word gait, you're walking with a steady gait, the way you walk, it is gati. It is that old Vedic word gati. So your gait is your going, your way of going, your movement, how you move. So we've already seen in this verse several words that we are, without knowing it, using in our everyday modern English. So, nahi viryam vina punyam. There is no viryam. We could use virtue in the broadened sense. There is no virtue. There is no punya. There is no punya. There is no purification without viryam, virtue, but here being used in the sense of the energy that has got to be put into it. Yata vayum vina gati. I've just shown you how vayu and gati are reflected in our modern English wind and going and gait. Incidentally, look at the word yata in the middle of the second line. They are correlatives, as and so just as, like that. And yata, meaning as, directly correlates with another word, of course, that you all know, is tata. As, thus, as in tata gata, thus gone, or gone to the thusness. So yata vayum vinagati, just as. The negative isn't repeated here. Nahi viryam vina punyam. There is no punya without virya. Yata, just as vayum vina, without wind, gati. Note that this word vina, meaning without, in English we have prepositions in, for, by, without that are called prepositions placed in front of the noun that they govern in Sanskrit and Pali. And in fact, in the modern languages of India still, they are called postpositions because they're simply placed after the noun. So we say without virtue, without effort, and they say effort without viryam vina and vayum vina. We'll now look at the goodness me, time is flying. So we'll now look at the first line. Evam kshamo bhajed viryam. Now, evam is a word you probably all know. It means like that or thus. We've seen it it's the first word of the great majority of the sutras, sutras, Sanskrit, sutta in Pali, as in evam maya sutam, thus by me heard, most frequently translated as thus have I heard. There's that same evam. Evam means thus or like that. And it actually relates back to the previous chapter. The previous chapter, chapter 6 in the Bodhicharyavatara, is the chapter on kshanti, translated variously as patience, forbearance, putting up with things, not resisting. That is kshanti. So that means having kshanti in that way. Evam, thus, means thus in the manner described in the previous chapter, chapter 6. So evam kshamo, in our root ksham, it sorry, the subdotted s is a sh, retroflex sh, ksham. Ksham often translated as patience. And again, here's a lovely example of how your one-word translation doesn't do it. It gets some of it, but not all of it. Yes, it can mean patience. It kind of means patience. But it more means forbearance, allowing things to happen, not getting upset at what's done to you. It doesn't mean not resisting evil. Of course you resist evil. That is part of sammakamanta, right action. But the ksham, root ksham, by the way, adjective kshama, one who has that quality, and verbal noun kshanti. More than it's this idea of forbear, allowing things to happen, not getting upset at what's done to you, not getting full of indignation. It's talking about an inner attitude towards what is done to you. So some people have misinterpreted saying, oh, it means that you don't stop somebody doing something wrong. You don't prevent evil. It doesn't mean that at all. It's talking about the inner attitude. You will have your virya to prevent evil and to fight if necessary. But you'll have the inner kshanti, that inner sense of not getting upset at how dare they talk to me like that? That's the opposite of kshanti. And it also means to forgive. Among the Pali chants, achayam kamame bhante, forgive me. The ksham in Sanskrit kshamate, in Pali kamati, imperative kama, kamame, often translated as forgive me. But again, forgiveness is something that has such a wide range of meanings in English. And yet another example, I won't bang on about it too much, yet another example of how the one-word translation only gives you a very partial picture. So kamame, forgive me, in the Pali chant. So kshamate just means be forbearing towards me. Don't be upset. So evam kshamo. So kshamo is the adjective, meaning one who has all this quality of kshanti. So being kshama, being forbearing, non-resisting in that way, not full of one's own, ego that's been subject to indignities, not descending into all of that, is being kshama. Kshama, by the way, becomes kshamo grammatically in a manner that you will learn very soon. I won't take time on it now, but just it's a grammatical alternative of kshama. I've just seen from some Odin, sorry Odin, I've just seen it flashing up on my phone that we need to take questions soon. Goodness me, there's so much more to say. Whatever happens at these classes, one thing is absolutely certain. We are never in 1,000 years, and I mean that literally, going to run out of material to be talking about. So I'll just read through the verse once more, and then I'll take the questions. And of course, next time round, we'll have to complete our study of this verse. Evang shamo bhajed viryam virye bodhiryata stita nahi viryam vina punyam yata vayum vina gatihi. Before we go on to the questions, you should all have seen by now, and Odin or one of the team can come in and tell you that on the login page for this class, there is a box for questions. I will try to get round to answering them all. With the limited time that we have now, obviously it won't be feasible, but I will do my best to answer them all. And if there are ones that are broadly useful for everybody, hey, that was a good question, might help you all, then we could also mention that at the next class. So excuse me if this has been a bit bumpy. I'm doing this for the first time. Hopefully it's been of some use. So if we can move on to the questions. So over to you, Odin. You're still muted, Odin. I can't hear anything.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you, Desmond. Thank you.
Well, there's a couple of questions here. James, first of all, thank you very much for an intriguing and enlightening talk.
Well, really thank you very much. Thank you, Desmond.
As we go forward, very, very engaging. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And there's a few texts that in that tone to me, which I won't embarrass you with reading out, of thanks. This is a question from someone in the audience. How long was Sanskrit was it actually spoken in its form in the Vedic form? How long was it actually being spoken as a vernacular language?
We don't really know. Well, it still is spoken to a certain extent. Obviously, it's spoken in the chants. There are strong revival movements now. In fact, there's a particular village called the Sanskrit Grama, the Sanskrit village, where you can go and stay, and that you are not allowed to speak anything but Sanskrit there. But how long was it spoken as a native language?
Yes, as a vernacular language which everybody would have spoken, like Hindi now.
Okay, so query whether it was ever used as vernacular language much after about the time of the Buddha. Clearly, it started off, and it's not as if somebody kind of said, "Oh, I'm going to invent a new sacred language." The language of the Vedas, in which you had the Rig Veda, and even starting off, Agnimile, Purohitam, and so on. That was clearly a vernacular language. It was the ordinary language that people spoke. No doubt they refined it a bit when they were creating this poetry, just as we do in English. I mean, poetry might not be exactly how we speak every day, but it is, we recognize it as our own language. So back in the time of the Vedas, going back recorded 3,000 years, and possibly sometime before that as well, it was the normal language that was spoken by that group. And there were similar languages, very, very similar languages, including what we now know as Pali, being spoken. Magathi was another one, very, very close. We know this from the inscriptions of Ashoka. So were they really separate languages? And I hope I don't upset anybody from north of the border, but listening to the kind of English that we're speaking now, if you stand outside a Glasgow pub on a Friday night at closing time, the kind of language that you will be hearing, is it really recognizable as English? If you ask them what language they were speaking, it's probably an unwise question to ask at closing time outside a Glasgow pub. But if you were to ask them what language they were speaking, they would tell you they were speaking English. So that we have a linguistic continuum. At what time At what moment in history did it cease to be Sanskrit? Well, we don't really know. What we do know is that, for example, in the Sanskrit dramas, for example, by Kalidasa, you have the higher caste people, the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas and the kings and the rulers. They are quoted as speaking in Sanskrit, whereas the lower castes are recorded there as speaking one of the Prakrits, one of the vernacular languages. So the answer is that I would say that well up to the time of the Buddha and beyond, you got a language that was either Sanskrit or very close to it, being a vernacular language, and just very gradually, as time went on, it was getting a bit separated into little dialects, which is why Panini stepped in 500 BC, saying, hey, we want to stop this fragmentation, which was obviously a very gradual process. So he wrote his grammar. So the language continued to be used. And then as the centuries went on, we don't exactly know which centuries and how many, but we can follow the process roughly in the same way as Latin in Europe. It was the vernacular language of ancient Rome. It was clearly spoken as an ordinary language. You would have heard, the Latin that Cicero used when giving his speeches to the Senate wouldn't be quite the same as the vulgar Latin spoken on the street, but that's exactly the same as in England now. It was Latin, and gradually, as time went on, fragmentation occurred. Different dialect groups sprang up. If you look at Italy, at what point did it cease to be Latin and become Italian? Well, there's no exact one point, and right up until in fairly recent centuries, you would get educated men around Europe who would be totally bilingual and would speak their own native French or what is now recognizably Spanish or Italian, and even among even in Germanic countries, Germany, Holland, and here Latin would be used. So gradually it faded away as a vernacular language. It didn't go out like a light. So I hope that has been some use. There was no kind of on-off binary answer to it. It was a gradual process. But at the time of the Buddha, he spoke something Pali is so close to Sanskrit. It's a bit of a misnomer to call them two entirely separate languages. And Buddha himself would certainly have been very, very familiar with Sanskrit. It's impossible for him not to have been. And he would regarded his own language as just almost a dialect variety of it. So I hope that has been some help. Incidentally, for timing, I'm happy to stay on as long as you need. So don't feel you have to cut and run for my sake.
Well, maybe we could do another 10 minutes.
Please, yeah, anytime you want.
It'll keep it into the Buddhist Society timetable. James, I wonder, could you unshare? I think what wasn't also Sanskrit used along the Silk Road in the various royal courts that India influenced amongst the learned?
I'm sorry. So what was it used along the Silk Road and amongst?
Yeah, along some of the royal courts, that were close to India. Sanskrit was used by learned Brahmins and so on. It was transported, wasn't it, out of?
It certainly was. As I say, the evidence of playwrights like Kalidasa, it would have been very much a living language among the learned. And for example, wherever you get, it was going to happen the whole time. You get a learned person would be effectively bilingual in Sanskrit and whatever his local dialect was. And he'd talk to his family and the servants on whatever the local language was. But he does a royal procession to a different district of India. He won't babble away in his local dialect. He will then be speaking in Sanskrit to the other learned people.
Thank you, James.
And equally along the Silk Road, it would have been carried along.
Yes. There's a question here, and that is about the Veer. And that is the Veer in Virgin and Virgo. Are they linked in some way?
Virgo. Vir, go, man, go away. So yeah. Do you know? I don't know. That's a point. I will check that out, and I will come back to you on that. Often I have to say I will check it out and come back to you. Mostly I manage. I'm just making a note to check that. I suspect the answer is no, but I will double check.
The question here, thank you very much indeed for a most interesting talk.
Shanti,
is this the same as yoga Shanti, that I was told means peace? Your explanation goes much deeper and I find it more meaningful.
Right, yeah, I'm just going to screen share again. Actually, no, we're going to keep it an oral tradition. By the way, generally, try and keep this as oral as you can, because the strong tradition in Vedic and Sanskrit is writing is secondary. It has its uses, but it's the spoken tradition, right? The root is sham, and just as ksham lengthens the R with the T, kshanti, so sham lengthens the R, becomes shanti. So it's exactly, it does mean peace. Shantideva can mean Lord of peace, or he who's God, he who's Deva, he who's Lord is peace. Yeah, it is that same one. And incidentally, one of the ways, there are several we'll be learning as we go along, of forming a noun from a verb is to add the suffix ta. So for those of you who know shamatha, as in shamatha meditation, that is shamatha, making peaceful, calming down. So sham, shanti, shantideva, shamatha, yes, it's all from that same root.
Fascinating. I'm just seeing if there are any more questions. No, I think those are the only questions we've got at the moment, James.
Right, and I do emphasize, if you have any written questions or doubts, please do put them up on the written question section in the page for this class on the website.
Well, so that brings us to the end of this particular class, and please, can we all use, or make use of the additional material we've got and the videos and so on that support us.
Oh yeah, just one thing I want to say about that. The stuff that I've put up on YouTube and whatnot, I absolutely no copyright at all. My aim for this is just that Sanskrit and Pali should be widely known. Any use you want to make of it, no copyright is claimed. You can make whatever use you want. Whatever kushala use, whatever skillful and virtuous use you want, please do. Be free to use it.
There's one last comment here.
Please.
It says, James, thank you very much. I sensed there was a connection between Russian and Sanskrit, and thank you for this explanation. It's important for me being Russian.
Right.
And a Buddhist since recently.
Okay, well, that's absolutely beautiful. And there are so many wonderful words. Sometimes they've changed their meaning as they've transited, for example, from Sanskrit into Russian. For example, the word, one of the what do they call it? Not the defilement, lobha means greed. But it's come into English as love. So the same kind of things, wanting, but with a very different tone. It's that same root. And in Russian, lyubov, ya vas lyubil, lyubov еще быть может, and so on. So that's the same lyubov. And for example, Bhagavan, the Lord, the Blessed One, for which you get the Russian Bog, meaning God, and Bogati, meaning rich. So Bhagavan and Bogati in Russian are from that same root. Don't get me going too much on Russian, or it'll turn it into a Russian class. Very tempting for me.
Another question, James.
Please.
Last one, because we've reached our limit. Will you be teaching us how to write Devanagari?
I will indeed. In fact, I've been already working on the videos for these texts that we're going through, the Bodhicharya Avatar and other texts that we'll be doing as we go along. I've been asked to do the Heart Sutra as well. You do not need Devanagari for it, but for the language course, yes, you will. and I'll take you through it with videos and the lessons step by step. It can seem pretty daunting at first, but it has such a beautiful structured logic to it that, you know, there's a bit of learning to do, but once you've learned it, whenever you see a word written, you can always pronounce it correctly. That's the beauty of the Devanagari script. So yes, I will be be teaching.
Thank you very much, James. I think
Well, thank you for inviting me, Desmond. It's been a great privilege.
really look forward to
Okay.
your next lesson.
Jolly good. Okay.
Thank you, James.
I wait to see you again. Thank you so much to you all. Thank you. Thank you.